if you don't have an anchor of what it means to love them, you will be tossed about and not sure what to do.
Yeah.
And not sure how to love them well. Okay, Brett, I'm going to read a quote and then I'll give you multiple choice on where you think this quote is from.
Oh, I like Tess. Bring it.
Okay. Here's the quote. Love is not affectionate feeling, but a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good as far as it can be obtained.
False.
No, that was not.
Oh, that's not true or false?
It was not true or false. And that's not false. Oh, my word. Okay, so love is not an affectionate feeling, but a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good as far as it can be attained.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple choice of where this quote comes from.
I don't need multiple choices.
A, the Bible.
No.
B, you're ruining it.
I'm not ruining anything.
Yes, you are. You're not supposed to answer before I give you all the choices.
Okay. Sorry. A, the Bible.
Okay, A, the Bible.
That's a
B,
possibility.
Cosmopolitan Magazine. C, C.S. Lewis in The Problem of Pain.
Well, since I have the entire Bible memorized, I'm going to eliminate
That's
A.
sarcasm, if you're not aware.
Okay, B, Cosmopolitan. Well, I've been reading Cosmopolitan for probably the last 20 years consecutively, so I just never remember seeing them.
You would recognize it if it was from Cosmo.
For sure. So I'm going to go with C, C.S. Lewis.
You're correct. That was not even hard, but you are correct. That is, it's not from the Bible, but it's from biblical ideas that C.S. Lewis pulled from and talked about in his wonderful book, The Problem of Pain. But on this topic of love...
Wait, can I give you a test before we move on here? I think you get a question.
You always test me.
I know. I like to test you. I like to build perseverance and character in you, honey. Okay, here's my question for you. Do you really love your kids?
Yes.
Wrong. That your first response is not to answer yes or no.
Yes, it is.
No, it's clarification.
What do you mean by love?
Didn't we not just do a 4-part series?
I just read to you a definition of love. And so you say, Erin, do you love your kids? And if you go by that definition of C.S. Lewis, which I think flows out of a biblical worldview, my answer is yes.
Oh, so I
love my children because I want their good as far as I can.
I get. Okay, so by questioning me, you clarified for our audience what true love is. Well, that's very good, honey.
But that is a good question. Do we love our kids in this way? Do we love?
Love is an overused word.
Right.
Right. So we'll talk about, hey, I love to surf. Mm-hmm. I love
coffee.
I love a New York Prime strip steak. I love a good glass of Cabernet. I love my kids. Mm-hmm. Right. I love you. I love God. And so the overuse of the word can actually lead to the misunderstanding of it, the undervaluing of it. And so what we wanted to do here with kind of maybe the provocative title is get us to think a little bit more deeply about what we mean when we say we love our kids. Mm-hmm. Because your view of that will influence and affect how you raise your kids, what you do with your kids. Mm-hmm. And we obviously live in a world that is devoid of wisdom on this. There's not a whole lot of wisdom out there. Mm-hmm. I mean, just think of all the popular slogans. Like, what's the most popular slogan about love right now?
It's probably a toss-up between, like, love is love.
That's what I think.
Yeah, that's what you
love
think is
is
the most
love.
popular.
That
love is
right
love.
Now, that's mm-hmm. one that's ubiquitous. That's everywhere. Yeah. Love is love.
What the heck does that mean?
Just pause, right, and ask the question from our critical thinking series. What do you mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what someone's going to say is something along the lines of, well, all love is equally valid, right? Love is love. So it doesn't matter if you are a man who loves a woman, or you are a man who loves another man, or you're a man who loves two men and a woman, right? Love is love. That's the idea behind that slogan. Now, of course, you can't ever live that out consistently, because all we have to do is give counterexamples of quote unquote love that are going to be clear cases where you're going to say, no, that's not equivalent to this kind of love. So if I said, gave an example of, well, here's the crazy thing. The examples you have to think of now are they would maybe be considered so extreme. Because if I were to say, oh, okay, your love for a farm animal is the same thing as your love for your spouse, I think there's plenty of people out there in the culture who would say, well, yeah, maybe, because there's no objective definition of love. Love is love. Love is what you make it. And so now, but if let's say we stick in the realm of human relationships, would we say that that a love from a husband to a spouse is going to be equivalent with the love, or is just as legitimate as a parent loving their child in some romantic way? Like, right? So a spouse is loving romantically and a parent-child loving romantically. Like, right? Incest. No, that's a clear case example where love is not love. It's not all equal. But it actually is probably a testimony to the increasing chaos in our culture, that you got to think of some more extreme examples. Because you can't give the example of polygamy anymore. Like, isn't it kind of clear that one man loving one woman is superior to one man trying to love 15 women in a polygamous relationship? But I think plenty of people in our culture have been shaped to say, no, love is love. So all that to say, the world's views of love are bankrupt. And what we have to be careful of is that we're soaking in the culture. And so we're absorbing these things. And this is why it's important for us to think carefully about the nature of love. Because we would say that love is, it's this climactic thing in our relationship with our children. Yes, we love our kids. We might give our lives for our kids. And the question is, okay, what does that mean? And how does that look? Have we simply absorbed cultural definitions on that that lead us to do things that maybe we shouldn't do?
Because I know what you're saying about the culture. We're soaking in it, and so we don't, we're swimming in it. We're in the water, so we can't tell what is affecting us and what isn't, because it's just so normal. Modern day American culture is what's normal to all of us. Okay, so, but I think it's not only like this is normal, but it's nudging us constantly to, in a certain way, on this topic of love, and it's nudging us and pulling us in a way that's so counter biblical in the idea of love, and we don't realize how much it's pulling us in an opposite direction, and manipulates us to this idea that love is love, which means you need to accept any proposition that's given for how you love someone. And in the modern day, that means that you don't in any way stop them from doing something they'd want to do or get in their way in any way possible. But so we're not only swimming in it, but it's pulling, the current is pulling us in this direction really strongly. Lately, I think even more so.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to something like love, and current cultural definitions, oftentimes there are these like kernels of truth, but they're wrapped in larger lies. So in one sense, you want to say like, well, love, everyone is in one sense needs love, is deserving of love, right? And now we'll go the step further and say, yeah, and they can find that however they want. Well, the truth is that we all are actually lovable. We all need love and deserve to be loved. And in the biblical view, we would say that's because of what we are. We are image bearers, made in the image of God. Therefore, we have inherent value. And of course, now, even though the culture may say that, it doesn't actually live that out. So you have the Christian worldview giving us the resources, the intellectual resources, the grounding for inherent or intrinsic value. Like you don't have to achieve it. But then you've got the world coming in and actually offering a view where you have to achieve it, right? You have to be a self-made man or self-made woman. You have to look a certain way. You have to be successful. You have to be competent. You have to be worthy. You have to be enough in some way, whatever the current moment, gives you in terms of criteria, right? And so in the world system, you're going to have those who are kind of those who are worthy of love and makes them lovable. Whereas in the Christian view, no one is left out, actually. Everyone is deserving of love. But now I think we have to unpack that more, because what that gets at is kind of the subjectivity or objectivity of love, and our definition of love, and then what that means in terms of how we love. Because it doesn't follow from the fact that we're all worthy of respect and dignity and love, that, because this is inherent to us as image bearers, that means everything that we do or say or think should be affirmed, right? So, all right, so
which you would say is the current way the world suggests that that's how we love people.
Yeah. And so, what you kind of get at here is this mixed bag of messages from the culture. It's just a mess when it comes to love. It doesn't know how to define love, articulate love, express love, go really deep with love.
That's why you get circular definitions like love is love.
Yeah.
Because then it's just left up to the individual. I mean, first of all, it doesn't even make sense. That's so incoherent. Love is love. But that just leaves it up to each individual to define what they mean by that.
Yeah.
Although, except for the individual like us maybe that says, no, there's actually a certain way to love. If you love people, it means this. This is what love actually means. So we might be excluded, but everyone else can just kind of come up with their own definition of love.
Yeah. So the world standards for love are subjective. And in that case, then they're not firm, they're not solid, they're not something you can count upon. They can change, they can differ from group to group, they can differ from segment to segment to segment of society. And so, the Christian view would say, no, love has to be objective, right? It's not just a personal preference, it's not just something you make up. But there seems to be an objective standard that's true, whether you believe in it or not. Yeah. So there's an objective way to love people and to love our kids, and that's what we need to get at.
Yeah, well, you think about in that confusing state of not really having a definition, and then you're a parent and you're tasked with loving your child. And if you're not clear on what that is supposed to look like, then this could get really messy, because you're gonna, if you don't have an objective definition, kind of something to anchor you, then when you go through all of life situations with your kids and life stages with your kids, if you don't have an anchor, of what it means to love them, you will be tossed about and not sure what to do.
Yeah.
And not sure how to love them well.
Well, and you're not able to sketch out kind of a clearer picture, right? You're not able to articulate what this really looks like. It's subjective, it's ambiguous. Everyone kind of decides for themselves, but we can't really live that out, right, in reality. And so then we end up reducing it to kind of this love is simply affirmation. And then, so what you hear the church, what Christians and parents and leaders say when it comes to any challenge in the culture or any issue with your kids, it's like, well, the thing that you can count on Christian leaders saying is you got to love them. You got to love them. And that's about the depth of the advice that we can offer. And that's entirely unhelpful for a lot of us when you maybe have a 13-year-old who is now saying they are a boy trapped in a girl's body and they want to get out and they want to take cross-sex hormones and they want to think about transitioning and they want you to start using preferred pronouns and calling them a different name. And then the only advice we can give is you got to just love them. And with no definition or articulation of what that even looks like. And it turns out it's just kind of this affirmation.
Yeah.
You affirm them, you know, whatever, but you certainly don't kind of shake things up.
I mean, you think about all the stages of parenting. You gave a 13-year-old. Well, what about the 3-year-old who's throwing a tantrum?
Yeah.
How do you love them in that? Or the 16-year-old that's rebelling. How do you love your 16-year-old who is rebelling against you?
Yeah.
You know, and if we don't understand love, we will be lost in these situations.
Yeah.
And these situations are hard enough. And you think about, of course, having a firm, objective standard definition, understanding of love, of course, is helpful in your relationship with your kids. But you think about if we took this subjectiveness to marriage, and that's what I think we see in the culture. This is why divorce is so common. It is this confusion on what it really means to love somebody and be committed to their good, as C.S. Lewis talks about.
Yeah.
So it's important and it's vital as we live life and are in relationships, and especially in our relationships with our kids.
Yeah. Okay. So in order for love to be objective, kind of coming, not subjective, not determined by subjects, us, there has to be some kind of appropriate grounding for it, like the source of this thing, the basis of this thing. And so when we look at scripture, we find that. And of course, I think we all would say, when it comes to the question, where does love come from? We would say God. Let's read 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. And it makes it very clear, the source of love. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Okay, so love is from God. And why is love from God? Because God is love. Well, what do we mean there? God's nature is loving. It's an attribute of God. It's one of his essential properties. If we want to get philosophical, right? That means that part of his nature is that he is loving. So that's what John means here as he writes, God is love. That's why then his nature then becomes the grounding or the source for these things in the real world.
Which it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around that. God is love. And it's probably because of how we're formed in our culture to think about love. But I'm just, you say God is love. And of course, I've read that before and thought about this before. But it is hard to wrap your mind around it, don't you think? And so what's helpful is then if you've studied God and know his nature, when you read that God is love, then my mind goes to how God displays that. Because that's how we understand it, right? Like it kind of puts handles on the idea for us of, so God is love. I understand what you're saying. It's part of his nature. It's in him.
Yes, because we're not saying God is the same thing as love.
Right.
Because in philosophy, we can talk about how the word is used, right? And that's actually a legitimate question. I'm just thinking back to, what was it, President Bill Clinton, where there was the question of what does is mean. But no, that's actually a legitimate question. When it says God is love, it doesn't also mean that love is God, that these are equivalent, that they are the same thing, that they are identical. But we're saying God is love, and that God has the property of being loving.
Yeah, which I think it takes some work to understand that idea.
Yeah.
And especially if we have a twisted view of love, you can hear something like that and struggle with what that means or how that's worked out, which is why if you know God, if you've studied him and you know him, it helps with making that connection. But
yeah, so love is not just something God does,
right,
according to 1 John 4, 7, and 8. It's who he is.
He is, yeah.
He is by nature loving. And so therefore he becomes the basis, the source, and then also the standard for love. God's nature, his loving character, is the source of love, and it is also the standard of love, and it gives us an objective standard for love. And so what does that look like? Well, then we see other scriptures that begin to cash this out for us. So what is the love chapter? Test question, quiz, pop quiz for Erin. Erin, what is the love chapter in the Bible? Don't look at the notes.
Oh my gosh. Of course, it's 1 Corinthians 13. It's read at every wedding.
That's correct. Ding, 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 ding. You are a winner.
But it probably should be read at every parent dedication at a church. We should probably read it there. We should probably read it a lot of places because love, of course, is more than just the marital relationship. It's in so many. Okay, do you want me to read 1 Corinthians 13?
Yeah, maybe not the whole thing. I don't think we have to read the whole thing.
The whole chapter? No, we don't have to read the whole chapter.
Okay.
You want me to read a couple verses?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, these people who are listening have their own Bibles at home. They can.
Okay, so it is a great chapter to read, and it is a short one actually, but the love part, we'll jump in on verse 4. Love is patient, love is kind. Love does not envy, it is not boastful, it is not arrogant, is not rude, it is not self-seeking, is not irritable, does not keep a record of wrong. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. So this is important. I mean, there's so many things you think of in the marital relationship. Again, I think we all go there. But when you think about the parenting relationship and these characteristics about love, and especially the love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in truth. That's maybe something to think about in the relationship of parenting that I think the world often doesn't consider.
Yeah. Again, think about the current definition, love is affirmation. Well, verse 6, it doesn't rejoice in wrongdoing. It doesn't rejoice in evil. That's going to go against affirming a lot if your kids, like our kids, are sinful and and they need correction. Well, that's not going to be affirming them in that. That's going to be much more confrontive. It doesn't rejoice with these things. Instead, it rejoices with the truth. Interesting. The biblical view connects love with truth. which goes back to the definition you read from C.S. Lewis, right? Desiring a steady wish for the ultimate good as far as it can be obtained. And so if you know truth, and you know the truth of human beings, you know the truth of their nature, how they're designed, and what it takes for them to flourish. And it's not these sinful ways. It's not the ways of the world. It's godliness. It's living in obedience to his commandments. Then you rejoice in the truth of that. And that is going to then guide how you guide them, right?
Yeah, and you take that connection of love and truth and now go back to those scenarios of the 3-year-old, the 13-year-old, the 16-year-old, and that can help at least guide us a little bit. It at least anchors us in, we want their good. Now we have to figure out what's good in these situations. But we're aiming for their good, not just affirming them, not just their happiness in the moment.
Well, and the whole idea of good is an objective concept. They're good. What is objectively good for them?
So you want, for the 3-year-old, you want their good. And so you want them to learn to have self-control. You want them to learn how to be in relationship with other people. You want the rebellious 16-year-old to learn there's consequences for the choices we make, because we know that it's good for them to learn that, because that's actually reality. And so it's good for our kids to understand reality, the way things really are.
Yeah, because if you don't live in accordance with reality, which includes God's moral reality, then you'll experience harm. And so I think this is important. I just kind of want to narrate this for parents. Like, it's really important for us to be thinking more deeply about the nature of love, that it is objective, that it's connected to truth and reality as we try to love our kids. Because, fallen human beings are going to want to live selfishly. They're going to want to seek their own good and not God's good. And so we're constantly having to try to steer them toward the objective goodness of God and a biblical view of love. Now, here's another interesting thing I was thinking about when we're reading 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, does not envy or boast, it is not arrogant or rude. That this definition of love applies to the kids as well. I just think a lot of us parents think of love in terms of a one kind of sided thing. I love my kids, which is, yes, absolutely. And there's a leadership you take in that and an example you set. And you are the first one to love that child who, when they are a newborn, are incapable of that. But as our kids get older, also then applying this standard to our kids and saying, hey, kids, is mom and dad are shooting for this. This is how we want to love you. And this is how you ought to seek to love us as well, and love your siblings and love others around you. So it's not just, I'm the one who's supposed to give love to my kid and that's it. That's the end of the story. No, I'm actually helping them to get in touch with God's love and that they have obligations to love others as well. So we need to be applying this to our kids. Hey, Micah. Hey, Ella, those two probably need the most work. But saying, hey, is your love being expressed in patience, in kindness, in gentle, those things. In
truth.
Yeah, and in truth. And like they might need to give their mom a good dose of the truth every once in a while. Okay. So it's not just affirmation. And so I'm trying to think of, how do we give some real life examples here? Because I think what we want to do is lay out maybe they maybe wouldn't be as intuitive anymore, maybe because the culture's knocked out our common sense, but helping us as parents to recognize that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your kid is going to feel horrible. It's going to wreck you. It's going to get them upset. It's not going to be peaceful. Love isn't always this, warm, gracious, whatever, warm, fuzzy, whatever you want to call it. It's not always going to feel good. Mm-mm. It's going to be confrontive even.
Yeah.
Which is, I think about, who is the most loving person who walked this earth? Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. That's the correct answer. Jesus is the embodiment of love, the second member of the Trinity, God himself, who is love. So Jesus is the most loving man who walked the earth. You want a model for love, you look at the life of Jesus. And at our church, we just taught through a series on Luke. And so reading through that gospel and going through, you're noticing how often Jesus does not fit the modern picture of loving. So those who think Jesus is just affirming and he's just gentle and meek and, you haven't read the Gospels if that's what emerges, if that's your view. The more you're in the Gospels, the more you see, you do see a gentle Jesus. You see a confrontive Jesus too. Mm-hmm. He's regularly confronting. And it's not just, I think sometimes people will just confine it to the religious leaders. Oh, well, it's those Jewish Pharisaical leaders. It's the religious leaders he's confronting. No, he confronts all kinds of people in the scriptures.
Which, going back to God is love, so Jesus is love. So studying the Gospels, reading about his life is helpful as a parent. It is helpful as a spouse. It is helpful in all relationships to learn from him on what it looks like to love. And like you said, it's messy. It's not, because truth doesn't always feel good. And so if we're striving to connect truth and love together, which Jesus does perfectly, then we should anticipate it's gonna be messy, like the Gospels portray Jesus's ministry. It's messy.
Sometimes people respond well, and other times people are ticked off.
Yeah.
And not just religious leaders, like the rich young ruler who, hey, Jesus, what do I need to do? And Jesus tells him. And he goes away sad because, he's got a lot of wealth. He can't do what Jesus says.
Yeah, because in that situation, Jesus knew his heart. And so he knew the man loved money. And so for that man, Jesus said, because he said, I've done all these things. And Jesus says, what you need to do, though, is do this.
Sell all of your
belongings.
Goods and follow me.
Because he knew in that man's heart what he worshiped more than God. And the guy walks away sad because he knows he doesn't want to do that. So
the question would be, was that loving of Jesus?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so but don't, so I guess here's the insight. Don't condition or don't create some criterion for your love that says, hey, love is going to always feel good. Mm-hmm. Like when I love my kids, it's always going to feel good. It's always going to end up in a peaceful, kind of situation. Sometimes it's going to be confrontive. Sometimes it's going to, there aren't going to be good emotions associated with it. You're going to be torn up inside because maybe you confronted your kid out of love because you want what's good for them. You want what's best for them. And they maybe respond with rebellion, or they're unhappy, and maybe that's even a long-term thing where there's just that conflict. Mm-hmm.
Which we don't connect with love. We don't connect. The world's definition of love is good feelings. And so if we believe that even just a little bit, and then our kids get upset with us, then it causes us to, it kind of throws us off. if we believe that, because it messes with our definition. If we aren't anchored well, then our kids getting upset with us, even though it's hard, if we're anchored well, we can know, okay, this is okay. I actually should expect this.
Yeah.
But if we don't, and we misunderstand love, and we think they should be responding well if this is good for them, then we're going to be a mess.
Well, what we might do, and what some of us parents do is we'll compromise the truth. Mm-hmm. We'll compromise the truth for the sake of peace and getting along with our kid, and maybe even to the extent of, well, I want my kid to like me. I want there to be peace, so I'm going to compromise my views on truth. Mm-hmm. I'm going to compromise the standards of God's word, right? I'm not going to hold you to account for that. And I'm going to go along with however you're living, just to maintain the relationship. I will sacrifice everything, even God's word and God's standards. And we've talked about this in a past podcast about how this is the kind of thing that can cause parents to deconstruct their faith and walk away, because their relationship with their kid really is an idol over and above God. And now look, we're not saying at all times is going to be confrontive. Sometimes it's great, but just preparing ourselves kind of to combat this cultural view so that we'll have the courage to sometimes love our kids with the truth.
Yeah, I guess it's really, if we reflect on it, do we love our kids with this deep love that 1 Corinthians is talking about? Do we love them enough to hate unrighteousness and push them towards the good even when it's difficult? And if we don't hate evil and unrighteousness as much as we should, then we might not champion good, and we might not actually love our kids well.
Yeah.
If we don't understand it.
Even if my relationship with them is more peaceful, and if it's maybe even closer or more close-knit, because you're willing to go along with them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of, I'm just thinking about narrating this for our kids, right? So when we have to confront them, especially with our older kids, the teens, we need to regularly explain to them the why and connect it back to love. Hey, why are we doing this? Why are we talking to you about this? Why are we confronting you on, whatever, your addiction to social media? Because we love you. And what that means is we want what's best for you. And this is not what's good for you. Or whatever the issue might be, is just having to regularly narrate that for the kids, because they are getting pounded by the cultural view of love and may have absorbed that. And so we're going to have to constantly battle that cultural narrative with the biblical narrative, with the biblical truth.
Yeah. This is why I love 1 Corinthians and thinking about it from a parent perspective, because it says that love is patient. And so this requires patience from us. To love them well, it requires that we're patient with them. And so we know some of these things, we're just going to have to be in it for the long haul, and it's going to take them time to understand some of the things we're trying to teach them. It's going to take them probably years to understand the good that we were hoping for them.
Yeah.
It might take them a while, but love is patient. And love is kind. And so if we love our kids, then we're not mean and, vengeful towards them, or we don't get to take our anger out on them. There's so much here to think about in the context of parent-child relationship. It's not rude. So we're not excused as parents to be rude to our kids. Mm-hmm. And so it puts all these parameters on how we love them. And
a way to think about it is there's standards. Mm-hmm. There's objective standards that then help us to know if we're loving them well, right? If you don't have a standard by which to measure love, you can't know if you're loving well or not loving well.
Yeah. And we know every parent listening wants to love their kids well. I mean, that's just, we want to love, we do love our kids, but we want to love them well. We want to.
Here's a real simple way to think about it. God's love and our love, therefore, sometimes says yes, right? And God's love and therefore our love also says no. And both are acts of love, right? And so sometimes it's no, 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 and that's love.
Especially when they're two.
Yeah. And then when they pursue that which is good, they're good for them, the things that will cause them to flourish as image bearers, we say yes, and that's loving as well. And so it includes confrontation as well as affirmation. And it requires sacrifice. And that's in our view of love. 1 John chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. 1 John just lays out so much about love. But John writes, "By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers." It would be interesting to think through what it means to kind of lay down your life in terms of your family. And not just a sacrificing of whatever your own, resources, but even maybe what you desire. I mean, I'm just thinking about having to lay down a desire to want peace with my kid for the sake of righteousness, because they're living in an unrighteous way. He goes on to say, "But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him?" Right? So there's physical expression, visible expression of love. Little children, and this is what I wanted to get to, little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. So just affirming words is not enough. Biblical love, grounded in the objective standards of God, results in love that is expressed in both action, deeds, and in truth.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.